And today's going to be an exceptionally good training video for Alteryx batch macros and for Tableau users who need to replicate workbooks in an automated fashion. So a little bit of background. In my global warming work, I've been, for many years, coming to the realization that I can look at data on a daily basis over many years. And so when I'm at a monitoring station, I want to look at the time series history of data for a particular day. So let's say January 5th. I want to be at a station. I want to see January 5th from 1960, 61, 62, 63, all the way to the current. And I want to look at a model across that time frame. I want to create linear models. So that's where my research has sort of migrated to. So one of the things I wanted to do is build a very highly interactive Tableau dashboard that gives me the ability to look at data anywhere on the earth for any day of the year, which means essentially because the data is so large, I need to make daily dashboards. That's 365 of them. Each daily dashboard contains about 70 gigabytes 70 megabytes of data compressed in hyper format. So that's more than 1 million records. I'm not exactly sure how many more than 1 million. It varies day by day, but easily more than 1 million. So in today's video, I'm going to show how I'm going to demonstrate the dashboard to show you the value proposition of it. And then I'm going to show how I use Alteryx to take the TWB file, the template file that I built, the template workflow, and create 365 copies of it with automatic renaming of the hyperfiles so that when I load those, they're automatically connected to the data sources. And so there's a lot to it. This is masterclass both in Alteryx and in Tableau, where you have to make sure that you know how to work in the XML files. If you make a mistake in there, you're going to screw things up. So warning number one is once you build your dashboard, make sure you have several copies of it. Don't destroy that dashboard. I put a lot of time in the creation of this one, which will be separately handled in another video to explain its functionality, but make sure you don't destroy your original XML file because you might not ever be able to recover from it. So that's buyer beware number one. Number two is that you have to do some research in the TWB file to figure out what things need to change to be able to go from one data source to the next. And I did that to figure out what things in the file need to change. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So let's get started by taking a look at the dashboard itself. So what we have here is basically this is the template. The date is January 5th, and we can pick data from any country, from any state, you can pick individual stations. You can dynamically pick stations here. I'm zoomed in Austin, Texas. In this case, I have English and metric units. And what it is because this is a completely dynamic linear model simulator in Tableau, you have an initial year and an ending year that you want to interrogate the data. Now, when we highlight over a particular data station, we can see here that this data station has 83 years of data between 1939 and 2021. And it's 100% complete. There's no missing years of data for this guy. So we're going to use this station. We can pick a different station. Once we pick a different station, of course, the thing updates. And this tells us here there's 82% completeness for this one. So we have our choices to pick, and we have our time frame to pick. And so if we look at, for example, down in the lower left, which is the daily maximum temperature trend over time, this is the Tableau linear model in the dashed line, and we can see that the p-value for this is 0.005, so this is statistically significant trend. We have variation from year to year, but it is statistically significant at 0.005 p-value. So using this then, if I highlight over any of the individual data points, we can see some information from my dynamically calculated linear model, where this tells me that today, and the day that I'm picking in 1968, it was 41 degrees. The all-time high for this date was 80.96. You could see quite a bit of change there over a 40-degree variation. So for the 60 years between 1960 and 2020, the Tmax change per year is 0.22 degrees F, or 13.2 degrees of heating over that 60 years. So that's what all of this tells us. The p-value only comes right now, from the Tableau linear model. I don't have a separate p-value calculator built in Tableau yet. I have it built in Alteryx, but not in Tableau. On the minimum temperature over here, we could see p-value 0.18. It's not as statistically significant as the Tmax, but you could see 5.3 degrees change. Here's the 13.2 for this one. And finally, up here we have Precip. These are the daily Precip values, the cumulative curve. And we could see that it's rained about a quarter of the time on this day for those 60 years. So if we change the time frame of interest to, say, 1970, then we're going to get a different linear model. And this is where the dynamic nature of this computational engine comes in. So now we look at this and we can see, okay, it's still statistically significant at 0.006, but the Tmax change is 14.9. And so that means it's a higher rate of change. So the initial condition there does matter a little bit, but still it's a significant amount of heating on that day in Austin. So that's the functionality of the dashboard. Now the question is, how do I take this and I replicate this 365 times to connect to all the different data sources that I have? Because in the processing of my original data, my original work on this in Alteryx, I created all of these, where's the hyperdata? Here we go. All of these individual days of data. Here's April 1st, April 2nd, and these are 67 to 70 megabytes. Yeah, let me finish up. So we've got 60 to 70 megabytes of data for each one of these, and there's 365 of them. So I want to couple the template file of Tableau to each one of these and create these interactive daily worksheets. So how do we do that? Let's jump over to Alteryx and take a look at this. We'll get started by shutting down this dashboard and come on over in Alteryx. But before we do that, let's take a look inside of our template. So here is a TWB. Of course, a TWB is an XML file, and you have to have the expertise to work in these. If you don't feel comfortable, then you may need to ask for some help. But basically, there are certain things in here that are going to have to change to do this approach correctly. We can see, because I have some dynamic parameters in here, we can see that I've got initial dates of 1/05 for these different years. These are the initial starting dates of that data set from all those monitoring stations all over the world. So you get some dynamic parameters. So I need to be changing these -01, -05s for the starting dates, and for the ending dates, same thing. So that's going to be one of the search terms that I use to replace things in here to be able to replicate these Tableau dashboards. Another thing that we're going to be replacing here is this string to the hyper file, and you can see it's a January 5th hyper file. So this is going to have to be beat up and reconstructed with an Alteryx. And then the date of like January 1 or January 5, that's going to get that's strewn throughout this throughout all of this XML stuff, and so that's going to be replaced too. But you can see how much is in the XML file. So we're going to use the power of Alteryx to handle that for us. So the way that I do this is my typical approach is to build a driver file that processes one file at a time. And so here we have January 1, January 2, January 3, and so we've got 365 of these mapped out to be able to make to run this batch file. So right now my run it term is says run it 0 says don't run it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and sweep down through the month of January. We're just going to, to show how this works, I'll just do the month of January. So I'm going to save this. The two fields that I'm going to do replacement with in the batch macro include the month day as a string and the month day as a numeric like this. So these are for the dynamic parameters that I showed, and this is for the labeling and the hyperfile itself. This is what's embedded in the file name. So now here's the basic driver program. We read this file that I just showed. Here's now 1 through 31 that we're going to run. It's going to send 31 records into the batch file, and within the batch file there's a couple of secrets or a couple of keys that you need to know to do this correctly. We're going to read the template file. We're going to start with the template file here, and it's going to be the same template file every time through. So that makes things easy because here's the XML coming in. I'm reading this as a CSV file with delimiters of /0, and I've set the record length to be 5,000 to make sure that I have enough width to capture everything in here. I could look at the maximum width and then just set something around that, but it doesn't matter because I want to make sure I have enough. So I made a big wide field for field number 1. So this is literally going to get read in record by record. It's called field number 1, CSV file coming straight in the Unicode UTF format. So once you have that and you run this, what you end up with is just a file that looks exactly like this. And so we're just going to do some replacements. We're going to take field 1 and we're going to replace the kinds of things that we need. And so one thing I need to do here is get rid of this string here and just replace it with nothing. I'm going to get rid of that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace those 0105s, those dynamic parameters, with 0101s. And that sets the base case up for me. And then in the next set, so that's that replacement there is based on the month day numeric. So the 0101 is going to get replaced with 0101, 0102, 0103, and that's what the action tool does here. It replaces the 0101. So that's the first replacement for those dynamic parameters. The second replacement is going to happen with the actual month day string. So where January 5th is in there now, we're going to change it to January 1. And of course, as you might imagine, the action tool is going to just be replacing the value of January 1. So that'll update for every day of the year as needed. And then there's one additional thing that goes on here, one additional replacement that happens down here is just essentially I'm fixing the path, correcting the path that comes in. And this path is kind of messed up because it's from the template file. It has, you can see this word files here. It doesn't have the actual path to the hyperfiles that I need, so I have to make that correction. And with those corrections then, what happens is I just stream out the final thing, which is another CSV file with no delimiters, never using quotation on the output files, output fields, and a UTF-8. And again, that /0 is key here. And what happens is what gets updated is the name stored in the TWB. So that January 1 is going to get replaced with January 1, January 2, January 3. So that's how the workbook, the macro, is set up and configured. So if we run this now, we're going to be taking that template file and creating 31 copies of it, 31 individual Tableau dashboards, workbooks. There you go. It took a grand total of 7 seconds to create 31 Tableau workbooks. So that's another batch macro example, a beautiful example, very powerful for you if you need to do replication of Tableau workbooks where you're in a big data source and you have so much information you want to break it out in particular ways. Another example of this is when I'm working with auto data streaming in from millions of vehicles. I might break that data out by model, by make and model, and then I process them separately. So there's a lot of cases where this type of approach would be applicable for Alteryx batch macros. So thanks for listening, and there'll be another video coming up explaining how that computational linear regression tool works within Tableau. There's a lot going on there, lots of interesting information, and then this will be a continuation of my global warming series. Thank you. Thanks for listening.